Howdy, Ken Nelson here. Welcome to my kitchen. For those of you who are intimidated by making biscuits and things in dough, I have a really simple, easy biscuit recipe that couldn't possibly be any easier. It takes flour, baking powder, a pinch of salt, butter, and some cold water. Things that most every kitchen has a tendency to have. And the beauty about these is that one can add cheese, you can add chilies, you can add jalapenos, you can add all sorts of things to them to influence the flavor. But this morning I want to concentrate on just plain, regular biscuits and taking the mystery out of them. So let's begin. I'm going to start by adding um, approximately a cup of flour to my food processor. Just a hair bit more. There we go. And to that, I'm going to add 1 pinch of salt, and I'm going to measure out 2 teaspoons of baking powder and sprinkle in here. Next, I'm going to put the lid on, pulse this for 1 second, take the lid off, and then we're going to add a little butter to this mix. To 1 cup of flour, we're going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 tablespoons of butter. The butter has been refrigerated, so it's nice and cold. I'm cutting this in pat-sized pieces or slightly larger, and I'm just going to toss them into the Cuisinart so that we can pulse this again and form pieces the size of peas. That's all that takes. Now, for a little cold water, and I'm going to use approximately 1/3 of a cup. We may need a little bit more, or we may need okay, this is not sticking together well, so let's add another tablespoon or 2 of cold water here. Now this holds together, and when you pinch it, you can kind of squeeze it and it'll hold. That's a good consistency for us. I'm now going to take the hopper of my bowl, my Cuisinart, my food processor, clean the crumbs off of the knife blade, then dump this onto my board. I'm going to get the last little bits of dough that are moistened and sticking to the inside of the container out so that we're not wasting any of that good butter or flour. There we go. Now, the thing is to not overwork this dough a lot. It does better when you just gather it together and compress it so that you've got all of your little bits and pieces of dough incorporated. And kind of press it down um, so that it forms kind of a circle. And for kneading, we're going to grab the outer edge, fold it over, mush it down with our heel. Turn the dough a right angle, fold the dough over, press it down with our heel. Fold the dough, press it over, press it down with our heel. We're going to do this 4 times because that gets all of the edges incorporated and forms some layers. And now I'm going to just press this down while kind of shaping it into a square. And I'd like to have a thickness of about 3/4 of an inch. Can you see this? The edges, of course, are a little thinner. The center is just ever so slightly thicker. Okay, so that's our biscuit dough. That's not very complicated, is it? And now for utter simplicity, and so I don't have a lot of leftovers to have to incorporate, I'm going to cut this into 4 people. I'm making biscuits basically for 2 people. This is 2 biscuits per person. And if you are making this for a larger gathering of people, double or triple the recipe with all of the ingredients. The butter, the baking powder, 2 pinches of salt for 2 cups, what have you, and this will work out very nicely. The water as well. Now, I'm going to put these on top of a baking sheet and stagger them just a little bit. Biscuits like to have a little space in between so that they brown evenly. And now I'm going to use a very small amount of vegetable oil on top of each one. It will help to brown the biscuit, keep the top moist without being too tough or too crispy. And that's it. If you were going to make biscuits for shortbread, or to use as shortcake for strawberries or peaches or raspberries or some kind of fruit, you'd add a tablespoon of sugar to the dough, and you might want to use butter instead of vegetable shortening. If you're using this with a really hearty stew, and you like bacon and save the bacon fat, you could brush this with a little bacon fat. Sometimes I will sprinkle this with a little salt, or if I'm doing shortcake, I'll use a couple of pinches of sugar and sprinkle the top. It works out very well either way. Now, these are ready to go into the oven, which I've preheated to 400 degrees. I'm going to set the timer for about 20 minutes and then check them at about the 15-minute mark to see how they're rising and how they're cooking. Depending on the amount of moisture in here and the fat, sometimes they will cook a little more quickly, and sometimes they take a little longer. All you can really do is just check and see what's what. Into the oven these go. 400 degrees, approximately 20 minutes. Set your timer for 15. Excuse me. Then you can see if you want to leave them in a little longer or if they're done and ready to come out. While we're waiting for the biscuits to bake, there are always a lot of people who ask about scones. And what are the difference between scones and biscuits? Well, not much, actually. The techniques are pretty much the same. Scones generally use milk or cream or half and half or a combination of cow products to moisten the dough. Frequently, they will add an egg, which further enriches the dough because of the fat and water holding capabilities that the egg has to make a very moist dough. In the UK, fruit isn't generally added to scones like we do in the United States. There, they have clotted cream, which is cream that's been allowed to sit over a pilot light on a stove and evaporate very slowly so that it's incredibly dense, and lots of jams and marmalades and fruit preserves that they then put on top of the clotted cream. They don't usually use butter the way that we do to moisten the inside of a biscuit. So if you want to make a scone, replace the water that you're adding with milk and add an egg into that cup of milk before you add it. Uh, Again, start with the proportions of about a third to half a cup at the most of liquids for 1 cup of flour. That should give you a pretty good place to start. And always add the liquids to your flour, checking in between to make sure that you don't have them too wet. If you get them too wet, add a little more flour, because a biscuit or a scone will not rise if they're wet. In fact, if they get too wet, you're going to end up with cake batter before you know it. So scones and biscuits need to be a little dry, but they need to be able to stick together and hold a shape, which is important when you go to make a biscuit, so that it can be kneaded a few times and so that it will rise. Your butter or lard or vegetable shortening or margarine should always be icy cold so that it kind of produces a layering effect when you're adding it to your flour before you mix it all up. Okay, that being said, now we just have to wait until our biscuits come out of the oven. We're at the 15-minute mark. I'm going to open this. I'm going to press down on these, and if you press down and it kind of stays there and they feel a little soft, it means give them a few more minutes. Dough and biscuits, cakes should all have a firm touch. If you press it in and your fingerprint is left there, they're not cooked. And while raw cookie dough might be appealing because it's sweet, raw biscuits aren't. So let them go for a few more minutes until when you press them, they're firm. The timer is just about to go off for 20 minutes. There we are. Let's see how our biscuits are doing. They're lightly brown and they're firm to the touch. That means they're baked and they're in good order. So now I'm going to take them off the pan and put them on a cooling rack for just a few minutes. They could be cut into, but you can see how they've raised nicely. They're a good 1.5 inches in height, meaning they've almost doubled from their size. And you can see the layers in here, meaning that they're going to be nice, flaky, tender biscuits. So let's see how we did. I have a little butter here, I'm going to cut a couple of pats. I'm going to take the biscuit, stick my knife in, just open it up. Oh, it's very tender and very crumbly. Uh, mm. It's got a lovely flavor to it. And I hope you find these simple and easy. They're delicious, and with a good hearty soup, they just are superior to a piece of bread or a piece of toast. They're lovely. Cheers!